Thanks a lot. So I haven't been able to participate in the conference so far. That's my first confession because I have been quite busy today. So I don't know what the process has been, but I will just share my screen and then take you through my thought processes concerning this topic. And I hope that everybody here will get interested and hopefully maybe have some ideas as well in the Q&A segment or the discussion segment. So I must confess that I haven't come to give you answers to anything. I just wanted to start a conversation. So the title, as Tikolo said, is Embedded Wisdom at Higher Education Institutions, and specifically looking at ethics and anthropology and the ways and means that we can embed them more in teaching. So it's a long conversation. It's not, I don't have the answers, like I said. I hope some people will have answers. I'm delving into things that I'm not super familiar with myself, but the result of my engagement with people from across Africa about what are the conceptions that we have indigenously about responsible business in Africa. So what I've found out, or what we have found out, I'm not alone. I have people who are also interested in the same thing. What we found out is that for Africa and for Africans, originally, and I think for many people still now, wisdom and ethics go together. We don't really consider somebody wise if the person is not ethical. So in our traditions, in our wisdom sayings, songs, the folklore, proverbs, we usually expect to transmit wisdom together with ethics. So much so that in some traditions, there is no specific word for ethics. Sometimes it's difficult to translate when you're talking to people at the grassroots and you're asking, what do you call ethics? There is no word for it because it's implied in the upbringing of people that as they grow wise, they will behave responsibly. So for us, our indigenous wisdom is embedded with those notions of upright behavior. But then we have different educational systems now than we used to have indigenously. And in those formal educational fora, we don't always focus on moral character, or when we do so, we focus on it as a separate thing from the technical knowledge and skills, which is the modern equivalent of wisdom, even though, yeah, it's not complete, but that's what it is. So people are growing, they're becoming experts in different fields, but they're not necessarily growing in character, or they are learning character separately. So they sort of find it in two different spaces. And that's why it becomes very easy to do certain things and not to reflect on that what I'm doing now is something that touches on my character. So we have a lot of double living in Africa, in Nigeria, maybe especially, but from the research across Africa, it seems that it's not something exclusive to Nigeria. So what seems to be happening is that people are getting smarter and applauding smartness, but they're not necessarily growing wiser in that age-old sense of actually imbibing what is good character, what is Ubuntu, for example, what is to be a responsible person within a community. So we have an issue there because we may not be achieving holistic education precisely because the two components are separated and one component is more critical than the other. So we sort of have this half and half approach. sometimes side by side, sometimes we're doing only half in some cases. We're focusing just on the technical expertise and we don't talk at all about character. But overall, either way, we get products that are not good. So we get people coming out of the educational system and they've learned, but they haven't learned. They haven't become wise enough to be responsible members of the society. So we need to find solutions. So if we can imagine it as a sort of matrix, we have people coming out into the system who are very high on technical excellence, but they may not be very high on moral excellence. And embedded in moral excellence is also the whole concept of who is the other person to me, who is my fellow human being. If I cannot conceptualize my fellow human being with a holistic understanding of how responsibility and freedom go together and how I'm responsible for my neighbor as we normally would have it in an African context, then we come out brilliant, excellent technically, but we may not care for the other person as we should, and therefore we may not find our identity in community as it used to be. And it's not working for us. Let me just put it that way, because in the end, you have a person who is high technically, high on technical excellence, and very low when it comes to moral excellence. So anthropology-wise, nothing. Ethics-wise, nothing. And I don't mean nothing totally. What I mean is that the person's development along the lines of moral excellence is not integrated with the developments across the lines of technical excellence. And so it's easy for the person to have a dual kind of existence where when I'm at home, I see what is good and I try to do it. And I will tell my children how to behave so that they can be responsible. But then I'm at work and I don't see anything wrong with cheating my neighbor or with doing something that ordinarily I could see clearly that it's not okay. So my wonder, my inquiry is whether we can use traditional wisdom concepts to achieve that by embedding them in our teaching in higher education institutions. So I'm going to sort of look at what are the possible ways that can happen. And because Africa is so vast, each context, it's not a homogeneous context at all. I'm going to try to stick to only one region, so Southern Africa. And like I said, this is based on discussions with colleagues over the past 2 years about responsible business in Africa. So there are these concepts that are connected loosely or closely with the concept of Ubuntu that many of us know very well. Ubuntu is about recognizing the other as the reason for my being. Yeah, it's really at the most basic level, that's what it is, to see the other person as equal to me, to see the other person as even more important than me, and therefore to see oneself as there to reach out to the other and to serve the other, because like there's no I if there's no you. I can affirm myself only in the context of another person also being there, and therefore there is that sense of oneness, we're the same. There is that sense of belonging to one another, and therefore interdependence. And there's a sense of wanting to work together, collaborating. And perhaps most importantly, there's a sense of solidarity. I would not want to do anything that would harm the other person. In fact, I would be looking for how to do things that would enhance my neighbor, that would contribute to the other person's good and not only to my own good. So these three concepts are the concepts that I have found intriguing in the course of this project. So to talk about Sumamina first. So pardon my pronunciation if I don't get it right, as I'm not from there, from South Africa. So Sumamina or Romana is an expression that has that connotation of wanting to serve, of being morally inspired to serve the people around. So it's from its very content, relates to selflessness, relates to wanting the good of the other. So I think that it's a very important concept that we cannot afford to lose in trying to educate people in higher institutions. Of course, it will have different expressions in the different areas of Africa, but I'm just using this one as an example. And the meaning of Tumamina is send me. It means that the person who is a leader sees himself or herself as sent, as being given a mandate constantly by the people, and as being there precisely on a mission to serve. And I think we can easily imagine that this would make a big difference to people in public service, as well as people in private institutions, which is everybody who is coming out of higher education institutions. Then there's this other one that I also found very interesting, which is Zonde Ramambo, which is a concept that was used to describe a way of storing grain so that everybody could be taken care of. And I think that our recent and current experience of the pandemic actually underlines the need to have that sense of solidarity across nations, across cultures. So ordinarily, this concept would mean that there would be grain stored at the chief's palace that everybody could benefit from. There would be common plots, usually provided by the chief, usually worked by the community together. And then the grain is stored in the granary, protected by the chief, and will be distributed based on the needs of our households. And it's the concept that I'm actually trying to focus on here. So this is not about agriculture. The next one is also actually based on agricultural practices, but that's because our people were very agrarian in their origin. But the concept itself can be taken out of that situation and applied in many different ways in the things that we do now. Basotho hat or Mokorotlo is a way of describing practices in agricultural economy in Basotho land. And there are about 5 practices that are gathered together that are understood under the same concept of Basotho hat. So there is the Sealolo, which emphasizes the sharing of mutual aid, being ready to go to the aid of anybody in need in the community. There's a Letsema, which I think is equivalent to Harambe in East Africa. And we do it here as well in the West, but I don't think we have a specific name for it, where people go and work together on one person's farmland to help the person to get it up to speed. And then whenever somebody needs help, they can call on the community. And Simea Lira, which is a bit similar to the Chief's Granary. I suppose, I don't know why it was called the Field of Enemies. The only thing I could think to explain that is that it's similar to the Chief's Granary in the sense that apart from the individual fields, the chief would keep a remnant of land separately that will be tilled by everybody, taken care of by everybody, and it would provide in case anybody had a problem in future. And if it was left over because there was no problem, it would be used for entrepreneurial purposes, and the funds from there would go into helping the community as well. and then Malila and Mafisa, which are other ways of interacting and attending to the needs of anybody who needed it in the community, where it's a community, they're community concepts, so everybody still had to play their role and contribute to the common good. But at the same time, it was a way of including everybody so that nobody was left behind. So these are like things that are far from the classroom space or at first sight. But I think that there are ways in which we can bring those concepts into the classroom. It could be from the instructor perspective, explaining one of these things and presenting it to the participants so that they can think about it, perhaps in the context of discussing a case study, and perhaps in the context of learning about one aspect of management or the other. I teach in a management school, so that's what comes to mind more easily. Or it could be participant-led, where we challenge the participants to look for the traditional concepts that could back up whatever they're presenting, and bring an ethos that is African into the classroom. And I think we'll get a lot of very interesting things. I have actually in the past, when I have done this, I have usually done it with projects, asking the participants to do research about because I teach ethics, so maybe it's easier for me, but I think anybody can do it. To do research about the ethical components of their decision making, and to present to me the indigenous justification for whatever ethical stance they bring into it, as well as the modern, perhaps Western justification, and then to compare the two and to input that into their overall response to that case study or in that assignment. And sometimes they could do that in groups or individually, and it makes them reflect a lot on our own traditions as well as the external. And I have found that the reflection is deeper because of this explanation that I gave at the beginning, that for us, when we look for the wisdom, we find that it's already embedded. Ethics is embedded in it. As soon as you start looking for a proverb that fits into the management decision that you're making, very often you find that there is some ethical consideration or anthropological consideration already embedded in that process. And then in exams as well, we can ask them to reflect and apply on some of these concepts that will push more of ethical reflection in whatever other things that they're doing in the exam. So having said that, I don't think it's enough to bring it into the content of the subjects that we teach. I think we also have to have like a holistic way of designing and checking what we're doing. So specifically, I thought to use Kirkpatrick's model, which I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it has 4 levels of checking whether we're transmitting what we plan to transmit. And I just adapted it a bit because Kirkpatrick was not thinking of ethics or anthropology. So at the first level, the pre-learning environment can help to pass across the wisdom that we're trying to emphasize. And at this level, I think we have to be thinking whether the teacher behavior or the school culture reflects those concepts. So if we want to pass across a message that Ubuntu is important, we have to be able to manifest Ubuntu in our systems and in our school culture. So that's important. Then we have to actually check whether they have learned. So in our assessments, whether in continuous assessments or at the end of the course, we should have a way of making sure that we don't ask only questions about the technical knowledge that they got, but also about their attitudes towards ethics in the assessment. And then post-learning, how do we then check whether somebody has actually learned when it comes to wisdom that includes ethics? Do we check maybe placements in some cases where we do internships? Do we check peer feedback, maybe in their second year if they learned some things in their first year? Do we do, in my school, we have life projects where we have a deeper interaction with the students that goes beyond just their career, but into their life views as well and their life goals. So those could be opportunities to check whether they're actually learning the ethics that we're trying to pass across. And then, of course, long-term feedback can come through the alumni networks and meetups with them to discuss similar issues and see whether they still remember those things we said. So this is the Kirkpatrick thing. I've already been alerted that it's time to stop. So yes, I'm going to stop now. Thank you very much. I look forward to your comments and to hear what you think about all this, really. Okay, nobody has a comment.
So thank you very much for your presentation, Professor Abiola. I would now invite questions from the audience if there are any.
Thank you, Timmy, so much.
You're welcome. Okay, hello, Juan Carlos.
So thank you so much for the presentation.
You're welcome.
Really enjoyed. And
thank you.
I just wanted to know a little more about your experience. What are, you mentioned the feedback that you received later. According to your experience, what could be the most influential element in the education related to this kind of thing, the culture and values, according to your experience?
So my experience is that when people study a bit of anthropology, it has a very huge impact on their mindset towards ethics, and it helps them to be able to understand why to do the right thing in the first place, and why to do the right thing when many people around them don't seem to care about that. So I think having elements of anthropology is something that is always very successful. I think also that challenging ethical reasoning is very important, not just like doing like a rote teaching and checking whether people have learned, but checking how they go from one point to the other in the conversations in class. So for example, if you have a case study, if it's in ethics, there's a kind of desirability bias where everybody knows what they should say is wrong and what they should say is right. So you really don't get far in embedded ethics if it's just a matter of asking people, what do you think about this? However, if you ask people to justify whatever position they take and to justify it thoroughly, then I think you achieve more, because then the person can't just say, oh no, that manager shouldn't have done that, or that employee shouldn't have done that. Why shouldn't he have done it? What's wrong with it? And then they have to really explain what's wrong with it, and they can't just use secular arguments to explain that. So I think those are the two things that have helped in my experience.
Thank you for your response. I would add a question, which would be, how do you promote ethical business, seeing that it seems less profitable than carrying out business another way?
Okay. How do you promote ethical business? Could you repeat, please?
How do you promote ethical business, seeing that it seems less profitable than conducting business another way?
Okay, so to promote ethical business from the classroom is easy. I think it's more how do you survive out there? Because yes, it is sometimes less profitable. So there are two ways, there are two approaches to this. One is to understand that ethics definitely is not something that you expect short-term gains from. You will get some, but really it's not about the short-term. So very often what people say is, in the long run, ethics will pay because you will have a good reputation, and therefore you will get people who are looking for ethical people to partner with will come to you. And usually those are the people who are there with you for the long term. If you think about it, when you yourself are looking for somebody you're going to partner with long term on anything, I mean, imagine a business transaction that is going to be long term, or you're trying to get married, you're going to look for people with good character, people who will be loyal, people who will be honest. Even if you're dishonest yourself, you need a long-term partner. You want a partner who will be honest with you. So in that sense, you will, in the long run, being ethical will be good for the business. The second thing is to realize that the reasons that you try to be ethical is not because of profit. If it's only because of profit, then especially in the short term, you will give up. But even in the long term, you might be ethical, and there may be things that may go wrong, not because you're being ethical, but because anything can go wrong with any business. It could be the business environment. It could be that you got the product offering wrong. It could be, I mean, anything can happen. So the decision to be ethical has to actually go beyond whether it's profitable or not. So those are the two answers that I would give to that. On one hand, very likely it will be profitable in the long run. You have to expect the short-term challenges and be ready not to win everything in the short term. And on the other hand, you have to be interested in ethics beyond whether it's profitable or not. So it's a decision that the person has taken. This is the kind of person I want to be. This is the kind of life I want to live. And therefore, I will go for it. So I hope it helps. Most likely to be profitable, but that's not the only reason to be ethical.
Yes, it does. Thank you very much. And thank you for your presentation and your time with us today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.